Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for stopping by to see me. I am Lina Patterson, and I have resided here in this lovely, lovely place since 1960 when I was 91 years old. I was born on a farm in Geauga County, just east of here, and my parents were, farmers, and I went to school in Burton. But even though my parents had a large brood of children and I was the oldest, they were able to send me to Baldwin University in Marilla to complete my education. I thought I wanted to be a teacher. So I did teach school in various towns in Geauga County, down in Medina, and here in Chagrin Falls. But I soon learned that teaching just wasn't for me. And as I was a modern young woman at the time, I took a job as bookkeeper with the Rowe and Giles Company, one of the largest employers in Chagrin Falls. Now, Rowe and Giles Company was a general contracting firm, and they had a lumber yard and a mill at the corners of Philomethian and Bell Streets. They were so busy. They grew so fast. They acquired a second lumber yard up on Washington Street near the railroad. Well, they did keep me busy. And by the 1920s, they were known for their garage doors and factory doors. In fact, we were turning out 500 doors every 24 hours. Well, as I said, they kept me pretty busy, but not too busy for my civic and community activities. I joined the Women's Relief Corps. We're standing here at our monument. The Women's Relief Corps was a patriotic organization that aided the veterans of the Civil War, the Spanish-American War, World War I, the Great War, and their families too. Well, I was elected president in 1918, and I had the honor and privilege to represent our post at the National Convention of Women's Relief Corps in 1918 and 1919. I really enjoyed my work with them. Oh, and I also became president of the Rebeccas, which was another service organization in Chagrin Falls. Well, we women were making our mark and having our say. And in 1920, finally, the 19th Amendment was ratified and passed, which allowed us to exercise our right to vote, and importantly, to run for public office. So that's what I did. I was the first woman to run for mayor of Chagrin Falls. And I can tell you, that was such an exciting time. The Chagrin Falls Women's Federated Campaign Club held open meetings to hear the candidates. Now the issues that were important to me were the electrical light franchise and our problems with the railroads. I wasn't completely familiar with all the laws and ordinances in Chagrin Falls, but I stood for law enforcement when those ordinances and laws were being broken. Well, I'm very pleased to say I had the support of my progressive sisters, and I had a very good chance of prevailing, I believe. Well, that's not what happened. Mr. Leslie Wyckoff stole the election from me. How did he do that? Let me tell you. There were 3 tickets presented. Mr. Wyckoff headed the independent ticket, and Mr. C.B. Waite headed the citizens ticket, and I headed the people's ticket. Well, for some reason, and I'm certain you can figure out what that reason was, Mr. Waite resigned from his ticket, and Mr. Wyckoff took it over. That meant he was heading 2 tickets. Well, of course, he won and I lost, although I did make a very respectable showing. Oh, and Martha Ridge was elected treasurer of the town, so we were not totally cut out. Well, I want to tell you that if I had been elected mayor, there would not have been those scandals involving horse racing and gambling. And Mr. Wyckoff would look the other way, turn a blind eye when there were questionable activities occurring. For instance, Ku Klux Klan meetings. Shameful, just shameful. Well, we women really made our mark, and I sincerely hope that one day there will be a woman mayor of Chagrin Falls and women on the council. Well, I continued with my civic activities, but I never tried my hand at politics again. Eventually, I retired to Burton, and I did want to come back here to the town I loved and where all my friends are. Well, thank you so much for listening to my story, but I have to go now. I hear there is an election coming and I have a lot to think about.
Hello.
Bye.
So nice to see you all here today. You know, I got up especially early this morning when I heard rumor that I might be having visitors. I was pretty excited. I don't have very many visitors these days. My name is S.L. Wilkinson. Well, actually my given name is Sheldon. But all my friends call me S.L., so I hope you will too. I was born near here in Clarendon Township in 1831. That's before Noah Graves ever even set eyes on the High Falls and founded the village of Chagrin Falls. My parents moved to the new village when I was still a young boy. I loved growing up in Chagrin, and like most boys my age, I took a job in a woolen mill after I finished my schooling. And from there, I moved to a dry goods store that used to stand right on the corner of River Street in Maine. I realized I enjoyed retail sales, and I became very interested in the growing business of selling patent medicines. I sold them in Michigan and Indiana, and I was quite successful. But I missed the village and decided to come back here and open my own shop, selling stationery, wallpaper, books, and general merchandise. It was very profitable, and I enjoyed it immensely. Since I got up early this morning, and it was such a beautiful day, I decided to take a walk and have you meet me here by the stately pine at the future site of a memorial marker for the free and accepted Masons of Chagrin Falls, Golden Gate Lodge number 245. Masonry, and specifically Golden Gate Lodge, were very important in my life. The lodge was chartered in 1854, and I joined the fraternity the following year when I was just 24 years old. So many of the most influential men in the community were members of that lodge. They helped me to become a successful businessman and became lifelong friends and mentors. In 1862, my brothers elected me master of the lodge, a position I held for 11 of the next 13 years. Masonry taught me so many wonderful things, especially the virtue of committing myself to the service of my fellow villagers. That's something I took very seriously. I was a village trustee, I was a justice of the peace, I served on the village council for several years, and in 1865 I was appointed postmaster of the village, a position I held for 16 years. So you're probably noticing the trend. Once I achieve an office, I like to hang on to it. Well, that is all except for one. In 1896, I was elected mayor of the village. And what a year that was. I was still running my shop while I served as mayor, but that's the year we completed the interurban deal that brought electricity to the village. And all the squabbles over who's going to get a streetlight. It's also the year we created the Board of Health to deal with the many epidemics that we so frequently had. And it's the year we contracted with the folks down in Brainbridge and created a reservoir to bring fresh water to the village. That river is the lifeblood of our village, but you wouldn't want to drink that water. And thinking of water, that was the year of the Irving House Hotel fire. That gorgeous hotel was the place to be seen in Chagrin Falls, but it burnt to the ground, all because we didn't have a fire department. So while we didn't get one for another year, I'm very proud to say we set the wheels in motion that year. So yeah, it was a very, very busy year for me. Frankly, wore this old man out. I was married twice to two wonderful women, but sadly we had no children. So when my second wife Mary passed away, I decided to move to Springfield, Ohio, to the Masonic home there. And that's where in 1914 I passed to the Celestial Lodge above. But I had my body interred back here in my beloved Chagrin Falls to be with my fellow Masons and friends. Well, like I said, I did get up early today, and I really have come to enjoy my sleep, especially on these cool fall Chagrin nights. So I'll say goodbye, and head back to my resting place. And thank you for visiting, and I hope you'll visit again real soon. And remember, we're friends now, right? So call me SL.
Well, hello everyone. So nice to have visitors. I'm Elsie Oper. I was born in 1860 in nearby Newberry, Ohio, but I came to the High Falls in 1873 with my father John Oper and my mother Eliza Green Oper. We came because my father John and my uncle George Oper were going into business over on Front Street. Front Street later became Bell Street. Now, the business they were going into was the Ober Brothers Sawmill. And my father was interested in cabinetry making and woodworking and such. And he made caskets along with that business. A few years later, my father John bought out my Uncle George, or actually sold his part of the business to my Uncle George, and George became the Ober Manufacturing Company. My father became the Ober Furniture Store, and they were in downtown Chagrin Falls. Now, he continued his casket making with the furniture business, as that was common in those days. Now, I was the oldest of 3 children. My brother Clayton was 5 years younger, and my little sister Gracie was 10 years younger. Of course, I helped my mother at home with all the chores and with the younger children. But I also studied hard, and I got my teaching certification, and I became a teacher. I was a teacher in the Newberry system as well as the Chagrin Falls schools. Now, one year when I was teaching in Chagrin Falls, there was a smallpox epidemic. All the schools were closed, all the churches were closed, the businesses canceled every activity we had. And there was a pest house up on Grove Hill area, and the doctors would send their patients to be in isolation to the pest house at that time. I was very lucky in that the Chagrin Falls school system gave smallpox vaccinations, and I received my smallpox vaccination along with my class students. Now, let me think here what I wanted to tell you next. I can't remember what I was going to tell you. I'll have to skip along.
Did you work in the furniture store?
What's that?
Did you work in the furniture store?
Oh, I most certainly did. I most certainly did.
There you go.
In around 1898, my father John passed away, and my brother Clayton had purchased the business from my father earlier in that year, and so Clayton went into the furniture business. And in 1902, he went to Columbus and received his embalming certification and his undertaking license. And so, of course, I helped Clayton. I helped everybody. I was known as the helper. If anybody got sick, call for Elsie, and Elsie would come and help. And so there we were at the furniture store that Clayton built in 1908 down on the corner of Main Street and Bell Street. The front entrance was on the Main Street, and that was the furniture company. But if you went round the corner on Front or Bell Street, you could enter through a door there, and then there was a very large elevator that went to the second floor. And that is where you chose your casket and made your funeral arrangements. Now, my part of that business was that I learned to drape the caskets, and I would go into the homes of the people for their funerals, because you know all the funerals were held in your parlor at that time. Well, I was also I forgot to tell you, we have this wonderful, beautiful black hearse carriage with a matching team of horses that pulled it. I was very active in my community. I was a life member of the Congregational Church. I belonged to the Ladies Literary Society. I had been a member of the Temperance Crusade against alcohol. And now I'm a member of the Suffragettes. Because you know, in all my years of helping, I've learned men get all the credit. And so, before I leave you, I want you to listen to the song, the marching song of the Ladies Suffragettes. And I hope you'll join me in the chorus. We are here to swell the anthem that was heard across the sea, that equal rights in law and love were meant for you and me, that every law is founded on the plain of liberty, while truth goes marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah, as truth goes marching on. Thank you for visiting today. I hope the mosquitoes didn't bother you too much. Oh, Judy, take one.
Hello there. My name is Charles Force, and this is my wife Marilla. We were married in September of 1833 in New York. We moved to Chagrin in 1847. Marilla's parents, Obadiah and Marilla Bliss, moved here in 1836. Obadiah and his eldest son James bought the Peace Chair Factory right through those trees there over on Solon Road, turned it into a woolen mill. They expanded it, put new equipment in it, made it a fantastic working mill. They called it Maple Grove Mill. I worked with them until 1853 when they sold the business.
My husband was quite the businessman here. He owned and operated several of the mills that ran along the Chagrin River. He owned and ran the tannery that was down on Bentleyville. He had the shoe peg factory right on River Street, and he even had a foundry that was right on Front in the corner of Philomathian.
My last business endeavor in town here was I bought White Axe Factory in 1870. Turned it into a woolen mill. Everything went fine until 1878. It's the mill right above the Stone Bridge and dam on Cleveland Street there. And after a week of rain, the dam let loose, damaging the mill. Well, I fixed the mill. I fixed the dam. Just couldn't get the business back going again. So in 1878, I decided to retire. Working on the river is always a tenuous thing. If the upper dam goes, the lower one's sure to be damaged as well. One thing always leads to another.
Charles, he was quite active in the city during the time that we were here. He oversaw the new stone bridge that crossed over the Chagrin River that replaced the old wooden one. He also was, oh, I just had cobweb moment for sleeping. Huh? Yeah, I know that, but that's not what you were. Oh my gosh.
Really what he was.
Township trustee. Wasn't
Wasn't he a township trustee?
Yeah.
Community organization.
Oh, this is bad.
No, it's not.
I
It's
can't.
life.
Welcome to senior
So, yeah. Oh, he also, not only did he oversee the building of the bridge, he also was quite active in trying to get the railroads in here so that many of the purveyors and businesses could get their product out. He also was quite active in trying to get the roads better so you could get more interest coming into the city, especially going to Solon.
Yes, I did many things. I was even elected as a county commissioner for Carter County for one term. But most of my business was right here in town. I was a trustee for 14 years. I even laid out the cemetery we're standing in now. And I also voted for the acquisition of Library Hall to turn it into Township Hall.
Yep. It's still sleeping. No, okay. Anyway, we raised 3 kids while we were here in Solon, and our son Emery was, when he signed up for the Army in June of 1861, for me, was a very bittersweet moment. He was just 20, but at the end of 3 years, he was also commander in the Union, which I'm very proud of. When he joined, I joined as a member of the Soldiers Aid Society because we needed to make bandages for our soldiers. We needed to knit hats to try and keep them warm during the winter. We also prepared dry food so that we could send to our boys while they're fighting. Now, my mother Marilla was a fantastic, energetic pioneer woman, and she had a really unique sense of humor when it came to some really tough times in our lives, kind of like we are. She raised 10 kids, and I think she raised me quite well. She had 10, and I was the second born, but I was the oldest daughter, and we learned to do many of the chores as is with a big family. As a miller's wife, a lot of times she would prepare the meals for the mill workers that worked with Charles, and a lot of times we did the cooking on an outside fire in a big pot. One day, I remember, I was helping her to make this meal, and we had cooked a New England boiled dinner and some Indian pudding. And just as the guys had come out and were ready to sit down, all of a sudden this pig runs out and knocks over the steaks and dumps the meal all over the ground. Now all the guys are laughing, and so was my mom. This caught me unaware. And she says to the guys, "Go ahead, go back to work, and come back in an hour, and we'll serve you lunch." And that's what they did. And guess what we served? Fried pork and potatoes.
Good. We've seen many changes here in town over the years. From horse-drawn carriage to oxen and cart, railroads, even electric railroads now. From muddy streets to wooden sidewalks, we have sidewalks in town now made of wood. You can walk on them. From our little house on Pearl to a magnificent house on 47 Orange. It's been a good life. I wouldn't change a thing if I could.
Now, if you'll excuse us, I have some Indian pudding simmering on the stove for our dinner. I want to thank you all for coming to visit and stop anytime you want. Thank you. And be careful crossing over the roots.
My name is Harrison B York. I was born in 1833 in Colchester, Vermont. When I was 14, my father moved the family to Munson, Ohio, and we had a farm there. That's where I met my Jane, and we got married in 1853. We had 4 children, and I moved to Bedford, where I became a mechanic worked as a mechanic. At the outset of the rebellion, I felt it was my duty to serve my country. So I joined in September of 1861, I joined the 9th Independent Artillery Battery of Ohio. And they were independent batteries because they found out in the Battle of Bull Run, originally the batteries were assigned to a unit, like the 7th Ohio Volunteer Infantry would have their battery assigned to them. But they found out that that really restricted the ability to move the batteries where they needed to be on the battlefield, so that we all became independent batteries. I went to training camp there in September on the east side of Cleveland. It was a 2-month training, and at the end of the training, our captain gave us all passes to go do whatever we wanted to do. Well, of course, I came home to see my wife and 4 children, but you should have seen the headlines in the Plain Dealer the next morning. Grand Union Spree, $700–800 worth of damage done. It seems that a lot of the boys decided they wanted to find every house of ill repute in Cleveland, and they really broke up the city. The paper said that they thought whiskey had something to do with it. So we headed south, the unit, and one of the things that happened was one of the boys that was thrown in jail was the quartermaster sergeant. So the captain made me the quartermaster sergeant. And then when we first got to our first post, they made me a second lieutenant. And by 1863, I was a full captain in charge of 4 different batteries. Now each battery would have 6 guns, and each gun needed 12 men to run the different components of what was going on during battle. And then you had another 6 men who took care of the horses. And then of course you had the need for cooks and other support personnel. So each battery was composed of about 130 men. Now we were never in any big battles. We were garrisoned often. Sometimes they even put us on gunboats, and we went up and down either the Tennessee or the Cumberland River to ferret out different pockets of rebels. But I got word in 1862 that my wife Ann had died, and the 4 boys were living with their grandmother in Munson. So at the end of my service, my original service of 3 years, I re-upped. I re-enlisted again. And by the end of the war, again, I was in charge of 4 different batteries. Probably the most important post we had was in Bridgeport, Alabama on the Tennessee River. It's about 30 miles from Chattanooga. And we were responsible for guarding this one bridge, which was a huge bridge across the Tennessee River. The lifeblood of the different men fighting in the South was the railroad. And that's why the units that we, like ours, were important to keep the railroads running. Our biggest danger many times was the guerrillas in the area. I mean, you never went anywhere off by yourself because you didn't come back. It was very dangerous in the countryside, so we had to be very careful. When I came back to Ohio after the war, I married Ann's sister, Hulda, and we had 2 more children. We went, bought a farm in Michigan, and we're living in Michigan, but we really wanted to come back here. So we came back to Chagrin. And I was working as a carpenter, and I also was a contractor. I built buildings in downtown Chagrin Falls that are still there today. I was very involved in the community. I was a justice of the peace for a time period. I served as the police judge. And then I was also involved with the International Order of Oddfellows. And then when the Grand Army of the Republic formed in 1880, I was a charter member. And I was very, very involved in there, holding just about every position that was available in the Grand Army of the Republic at one time or another. I had a house on Front Street near the Congregational Church, and we had a good life here. But then in 1883, Hulda got cancer and died. So I married my third wife, Jane, who's here with me, and living there near the church. We could walk into town, we could enjoy ourselves, and we did. And then on the morning of November 14th, 1909, I was walking down into town, and I had a heart attack and died. He said I was probably dead before I hit the ground. My wife Jane was able to file for support because I had been injured during my campaign in 1862, and so she got some compensation from the government. But we had a good life here, and we were thankful to have lived in this community.
Welcome, friend. It's nice of you to stop by. It's also nice to have an audience again. Now, for those of you who don't know me, I am Dr. Harvey Willard Curtis, physician, counselor but not at law, amateur historian, and speaker. Now, you find me thinking about some of the changes that have occurred in our world in the last several decades. Take, for example, this white coat that I'm wearing and this white mask that I've got. It was not too long ago that they were introduced as a means of patient protection, and I find them to be quite efficacious. Now, I also find for general practice, hand washing is very appropriate. Now, we do have a railroad in Chagrin, and that has made travel, long distance travel, much, much easier. And our local roads are very, very slowly being hard surfaced, which is getting us out of the mud. And my horse and buggy are much, much happier. Now, all we had during the Civil War was mud roads. And I was of two minds when I watched the boys go off to the war. Unfortunately, I knew that some of them would not come back. On the other hand, I knew that that peculiar, pernicious institution of slavery had to be eliminated. As a young boy growing up in Charlestown in Portage County, I learned the art of politics, and I learned the evils of slavery when I helped my father run his campaigns. So it was rather appropriate that I became an agent for the Western Anti-Slavery Society. It was my job to travel around and find venues that were appropriate for anti-slavery meetings and rallies. At one of these meetings, I met a gentleman named Dr. Justice Vincent of Chagrin Falls. Now, perhaps you've heard of him. He is the person who in 1841 got our county line moved from Main Street here to about a mile east. He also was my preceptor when I was in medical school. That means he taught me the art of doctoring. Now, in 1852, after I graduated, I moved my family to Chagrin, and I've been here ever since. I'd married and had a child before I went to medical school, and now we're blessed with 3 more children. Well, I never really lost the taste for politics, even though I was a practicing physician. And in 1861, I was elected to the school board. Then, in 1864, the good residents of Chagrin elected me to be the mayor. But when I walked in and saw the room we were expected to use, I said, I will not meet there. They had to provide us with more appropriate accommodations. Well, it was in the end of my tenure as mayor that the good ladies of the Soldiers' Aid Society caused to be erected this monument you see behind me, dedicated to the memory of the boys that lost their lives as a result of the Civil War. Well, right after the war, one of the burning questions of the day was, what do we do with Negro suffrage? As a general rule of thumb, the southern states didn't care about their voting. The northern states were all for it, all for Negro voting, in the defeated South, but not so much in their own states. And those darn conservative Democrats, they were vehemently opposed to Negro suffrage. Matter of fact, they were so opposed, I thought they wanted to start another war. And then I was elected to in 1870, the Ohio State House of Representatives. Of course, my first responsibility was to my patients, so I went into partnership with a young Dr. Doty. And then I moved down to Columbus and took my seat in the legislature. Well, when I was there, the first thing that happened was I had 17 days before I had to vote on the 15th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. For me, it was an easy vote. I was a liberal Republican and an abolitionist, so it was not a problem. On the other hand, for some people, it was really a significant issue. The amendment, the ratification of the amendment actually was passed by one vote in the Ohio Senate and 2 votes in the Ohio House. It was a close call. Well, about a year after that, I introduced a bill for the prevention of cruelty to animals. Now, with the usual horse trading, it was passed. And I was rather proud of that bill. And it was a few years later that the residents of the area voted me in to the Ohio State Senate. There were only 2 things of note in the Senate as far as I was concerned. First was, I was elected to be president of the Senate. And then, when Governor Hayes stepped down to run for the presidency, why, I was stepped up to the lieutenant governorship. Well, after that, I decided it was time to come home and take care of my practices and to do my family. So, all of the doctrine and all of the local political shenanigans going on, I had tried to get off the school board, and the residents voted me back on, and they voted me mayor twice more over this. But with all the normal doctrine, accidents, epidemics, the occasional forensic examination of people, and the speeching, the meetings that I attended, I was rather busy. Oh, for 20 years I was also the president of the Western Reserve the Western Reserve Pioneers Historical Association. It was 1900 I decided to retire. And for the next 2 years, I had an easy life. But friends, I'm not any longer a practicing physician, but I can tell you that the flu can be a killer. It was what put me here. And with that, friends, my tale is ended. It is time for me to bid you a good morrow and send you on your way.
Good afternoon. I am Joseph Stoneman. I was born in England in 1825, Devonshire, England, and in 1836, my father and mother decided to try their luck in America, and they brought us all over to Orange Township. There were 13 of us, and we weren't the only ones to come here from England to Orange Township. My cousin, William Hutchings, you might know him better as Boss, came here as well. And another family that came is the Whitlock family. And my dear wife, Grace Whitlock, is from that family. We were married in 1854. After farming a while in Orange, or actually for several years, and after the war, the rebellion,
I decided to move my family to the village, to Chagrin Falls. Grace's brother, Elias Whitlock, had a hardware store in the village, right on Main Street, just north of the river. And because I had come from farming background, being a farmer, I was very familiar with hardware and with products sold to the agriculture, construction industries. I was a real good fit. We were a good team. We also sold paint, plaster, bolts, nails, you name it. We also sold ladies and gents ice skates. So we were a good team. Unfortunately, Elias passed away in his mid-30s. But it's all about family. And that's when I brought in Boss Hutchings, my cousin, into the business. Boss, he is well familiar with construction and buildings. He was also quite a businessman. He owned the Enterprise flour mill, he owned brick yards, and he was a great asset to the business. We renamed the store Stoneman and Hutchings Hardware. And Boss died in 1894, and again, all about family. I brought in my son John, and later my son R.W. into the business. The building was pretty small at that time. We expanded the building to much larger. We installed electric lights. We installed a big plate glass window to better show our wares. And we had quite a successful business then too. And again, all about family. My son-in-law, Devin Williams, owned the building right next to us. Now, while Grace was tending to the family, and I was working hardware in the hardware store, I decided to venture out into being more involved in the village. And I was on village council for a number of years. I also was a leader and led the Great Cuyahoga County Agricultural Fair that was held each year at the fairgrounds. And I also looked out for the future of Chagrin Falls. And I was one of the leaders to bring in the Chagrin Falls Southern Railroad in 1877. I was a shareholder, I was a director, I was treasurer of the railroad. We had two places, two houses in Chagrin Falls. One was located on top of Grove Hill in a grove of trees. It was called Stoneman's Grove. And it was a popular place for the community to have recreational activities, picnics, this type of thing. While we didn't live there, part of our family did, it was a very popular place. The other house was a beautiful red brick house on East Orange Street. If you're walking down East Orange, I'm sure you've seen it, off to the right, with the brick carriage house in the rear. And it was a very short walk for me to the village from that house. Well, I retired in 1901 and turned the business over to my sons, John and R.W. And then in 1909, my wife, Grace, passed away. Then I later, 14 months later, followed her in death in 1911. But we had a wonderful, wonderful experience in this area, a wonderful life, successful business, a very successful family. And you can't ask for anything more than that. Thank you.